Alright, hey there. Well, in the vein of random deck techs of commander decks, I will be doing Yisan the Wanderer Bard. He is a 3-cost general, he's a 2-3, and you pay 3 and tap him, and you put a verse counter on him, and you search up a creature with the equivalent number of verse counters on him and put him onto the battlefield. So Yisan is an entertaining commander. He gets to do a lot of really cool stuff with his searching ability. You're able to play a whole bunch of neat little utility creatures. You can be really fast, actually. People oftentimes underestimate him. You know, he seems like a fairly slow general, but when you combine the mana that you can produce with a dedicated elf ball strategy, along with the untapping that you can get from such a strategy with, you know, Wirewood Symbiote, Quirion Ranger, etc., you can get a very fast, very explosive commander that's able to win consistently very quickly. So, this is a budget list, so there's not going to be any Gaia's Cradles or anything crazy like that. So just, if you're wondering why those aren't included, chances are it's probably because of that. So, mana base, obviously you're in mono green, so it's mostly going to be forests. Forests are great things. They allow you to do cool things with stuff like Quirion Ranger, and I don't know if you're playing dual commander Raphaelos. But anyway, non-basics. Nykthos. This deck generates a crap ton of devotion, and being able to generate that into an obscene amount of mana with Nykthos is obviously awesome. Gemstone Caverns. It's a little bit like Chromebox. Basically, if you're going second, you put it onto the battlefield before the beginning of the game and exile a card from your hand, and you're able to generate any colored mana with it. Wirewood Lodge untaps elves when you have stuff like Priest of Titania, Elvish Archdruid, any of those other elves that can tap for obscene amounts of mana. This just allows you to get even more mana from that. And then Ancient Tomb, tap 2, deal 2 to you. Basically, great ramp. Doesn't, cost you a creature card, and is able to be fetched with crop rotation, which is great because it means crop rotation can be used as a ramp spell. So now we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the deck. So the first things that oftentimes you'll be getting these out on turn 1 in order to get out of turn 2 Yisan, and that is the Mana Dorks. So these are the 1-drop creatures of this list. You notice there is a lot of them, because getting out a turn 2 Yisan is crucially important for making the deck function. Getting him out on turn 3 means you're not going to be tutoring until turn 4, whereas getting him out on turn 2 means that you can start tutoring on turn 3, and the difference is generally pretty night and day in terms of the speed of the deck. So these cards are pretty much all, dorky dorks. You play them on turn 1, they tap for a single mana, and you're happy about that. However, not really something that you're going to be searching on Yisan oftentimes, because there's just better stuff to find. Speaking of that better stuff, so these are kind of the 5 big targets that you're going to have on your first CMC. So for mana, you got Sakura Tribe Scout and Draga Street Speaker. Draga doesn't really need much explanation. He's a green Soul Ring. You pay 2 and then tap him for 2, and he's excellent. Sakura Tribe is a little bit less, obvious. You tap her and you put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. This deck tends to have a lot of ways to bounce lands onto your hand in order to untap creatures, and so having that means that Sakura Tribe Scout's generally always going to be able to find a target to ramp, and oftentimes it's just straight up better than just having the 1-turn ramp, because you'll have that land on the battlefield permanently. Speaking of bouncing, you have Quirion Ranger and Wirewood Symbiote. Both of them function to untap. Being able to untap Yisan multiple times a turn allows you to kind of break the fairness of the card, because you're getting multiple activations of his ability per turn cycle. And that allows him to be a lot faster. You're getting up into once you get to the 4, 5, 6 burst counters in turn 4 and 5, then you're really getting value. So Quirion Ranger bounces a forest, Wirewood Symbiote bounces an elf. They're both good in certain situations. And then the final 1-drop, very important to the deck, is Sylvan Safekeeper. This says sacrifice a land, target creature you control gains Shroud. Being able to protect Yisan at instant speed is a very big deal, because oftentimes such a commander-centric deck is bound to draw a lot of hate, and so having the protection, even if it costs you a land, is oftentimes worth it, because once you start hitting the crucial number of verse counters, the deck just really tends to go off. So the 2 CMC creatures I will list out here. There's not as many 2 CMC creatures, but the ones that are here are very important. So 2 CMC is where you start to get into Yisan's ability to be a proactive or reactive deck at the table. Usually Yisan will be coming down turn 2. He'll be searching out a 1-drop turn 3, and we'll be searching out a 2-drop turn 4. So that means you can relatively consistently expect to be able to get a Scavenging Ooze or Phyrexian Revoker out on turn 4 against whatever opponent you're playing. So Scavenging Ooze hates against graveyard strategies very effectively, and Phyrexian Revoker just hates on activated abilities very effectively. So great cards to have in your arsenal if you do face decks that relies heavily on those strategies. As well, Tajuru Preserver if you're facing stacks decks, if you're facing Living End decks, stuff like that. It's good to have Tajuru Preserver to be able to get out. You're also able to find it off of Chord Calling, Green Sun Zenith, stuff like that later in the game in response to such sacrifice effects. So having it in the deck is just a good backup plan. There's 2 untapped abilities at the CMC. So Seeker of Skybreak is just tap, untap target creature. Pretty vanilla, but pretty powerful, and has some combos that we'll talk about later in the video. Scrib Ranger has the same ability as Quirion Ranger. Bounce a forest, untap a creature. It's a very important piece of the Yisan deck, so having it at the 2 CMC just adds additional redundancy so that if you don't get Quirion Ranger or Wirewood Symbiote on the first CMC Yisan Tutor, you're able to get it on the second CMC Yisan Tutor. Elvish Visionary, just a good card. Combos with Wirewood Symbiote. You activate this, bounce this, use the mana that this probably generated to replay Elvish Visionary, and you get a card for free every turn. So a nice little engine there that you can use. And then Priest of Titania, this is sometimes turns into an Elf Ball deck just depending on how your tutor chains turn out. And so Priest of Titania is routinely tapping for 3, 4, 5 absurd amounts of mana. It just does great things with that. Alright, so our 3rd CMC continues with the fun. Alright, so here we have our suite of 3 CMC creatures. We'll go through each of them. Loaming Shaman is exile target graveyard, basically, or at least target graveyard. You can use this both offensively and defensively. If you get wiped and you're going back up the chain, you can use this to shuffle all of the cards that got into your graveyard back into your library, so you can continue searching for them with Yisan. But oftentimes you'll just use it in response to an Entomb Reanimate if you're already at 2 verse counters. Reclamation Sage, obviously great to just blow up anything your opponents are doing. Oak Street Innkeeper, a little bit of a confusing choice. So if Yisan is sitting at 2 verse counters and he's targeted with removal, you can tap him, search up Oak Street Innkeeper, comes onto the battlefield, fizzles your opponent's kill spell. So 3 CMC is where Yisan starts to get scary, so oftentimes he'll be drawing hate at this point, so having that instant speed ability to fizzle any kill spell that your opponent's pointed him is important. Hop back over to Elvish Archdruid, pretty much the same logic as Priest of Titania. Elf creatures control +1/+1 is not oftentimes relevant, but sometimes it is. And then just tapping for green equal to the number of elves just, turns out to be a boatload of mana. Eternal Witness doesn't need a whole lot of explanation, gets back combo pieces if they happen to eat spot removal. It's just a good value card. Imperious Perfect. If you are flush with mana, you don't necessarily need the Elvish Archdruid because maybe you got a Priest of Titania out. The previous search, you're able to just start pumping out elves, and each one means that your Priest of Titania is able to tap for even more mana because of the increasing number of elves on the battlefield. So this is oftentimes just the win more card, but I think it still deserves its place here. And then Elvish Harbinger, which is one of my favorite cards in this deck. You're able to do a lot of very clever things, like on the upkeep after searching out a 2 converted mana cost creature with Yisan, activate Yisan for 3, go grab Elvish Harbinger, and then Elvish Harbinger out, say, a Quirion Ranger, to then play on your draw, or then draw on your draw step, then play it, and then untap Yisan. So it basically serves as a third way to get an untap engine going at 3 CMC. You're also able to search up, other things that maybe you missed, whether that be, you ended up needing that Tajuru Preserver, or anything like that. So, good card, able to do fun things with it. So those are the 3. The creature base in this is slanted heavily to the lower creature aspect, because oftentimes once you actually get past 3 verse counters, you're starting to get pretty close to just winning, so there's not as much choice that needs to be made. So the number of creature options that are available drops as the CMC increases. So these are the options at 4 CMC. Temur Sabertooth is just a great utility creature. He's able to save your stuff from removal spells, and is part of a combo piece that we'll talk about in a minute. Yeva, Nature's Herald. If you know that your stuff is going to get mass bounced, oftentimes you can float a whole bunch of mana, summon Yeva, and then replay it. But otherwise, it's just a good card if you have some green cards stuck in your hand that you want to be able to play out on your opponent's turns. Karametra's Acolyte is possibly the most broken card in this deck. If you successfully Yisan at 1, 2, and 3, you are going to have at least 6 Devotion out in most cases, which means that this is going to tap for 6 mana. And then combine untap effects, you can be getting 15, 20 mana by the time this actually untaps. So, incredibly powerful card there. Masticore is one of the few ways that mono green has to deal with creatures. Generally, Yisan doesn't really care that much about what's in your hand, so having to discard a card is not a huge deal. But the 2 to ping is an incredibly good ability. Regenerate rarely comes up, but it's still nice there. And this also has a nice little combo that we'll talk about a little bit later. Anyway, back to the Temur Sabertooth combo. There is a specific line of cards that you can search for with Yisan, or that end up as an infinite combo just off of verse counters. So the way it works is if you search out Wirewood Symbiote, followed by Priest of Titania, activate and then tap Yisan as for the 3rd verse counter, untap him with Wirewood Symbiote, and then activate him again, he will have 2 copies of his ability on the stack. Both will resolve with 4 verse counters, and so you can get both Karametra's Acolyte and Temur Sabertooth onto the battlefield. Once these are onto the battlefield, you're able to activate Wirewood Symbiote to untap Karametra's Acolyte, tap Karametra's Acolyte for mana, bounce Priest of Titania. So Karametra's Acolyte will have 6 mana-ish per go-around. Activate Temur Sabertooth's ability to bounce the Wirewood Symbiote, and then replay both of these. So you've netted, say, 1 or 2 mana based on the devotion on the battlefield after Karametra's Acolyte is there. So basically, Temur Sabertooth gets around the requirement of Wirewood Symbiote to only activate once per turn, because each time you cast him, he's a new copy. So this allows you to create an infinite loop, which generates infinite mana and infinite untaps, and generally wins the game from there. So having that kind of tutor chain in your back pocket is great when you happen to go Wirewood Symbiote into Priest of Titania and see an open board to just go for the infinite tutor there, or infinite combo there. So that's the 4 CMC cards. We'll come back to Masticore in a minute. There's only a single 5 CMC card in this deck that this deck is interested in. It is the only thing that you really want to be searching up at 5, and that is Seedborn Muse. Seedborn Muse powers this deck and makes it the explosive threat that it is. So, the idea is, once you get Yisan out and Seedborn Muse out, each of your opponent's turn, Yisan gets to untap, along with the mana to tap him. So each of your opponent's turn, you will be getting a 6-drop, a 7-drop, an 8-drop, a 9-drop, a 10-drop, etc., etc. Combine untap effects, and by the time the turn comes around with Yisan after getting out of Seedborn Muse, you're generally going to be putting down 10, 11, and 12 drops. which is obviously excellent. So Seedborn Muse basically turns the engine of this deck on. So there is actually no other card at the 5-drop slot, because you're just not ever going to want to be searching for it, because it's just so incredibly powerful. So then we get to the 6 drops. There's 2 of them, and they both serve different but similar purposes. Soul for Phyrexia is kind of your standard one. It gives all of your permanents indestructible. So it gives you board wipe prevention in mono green. One of the few ways that you're actually going to accomplish that. And yeah, just also just a good card. Kamal Fist of Krosa has 2 excellent abilities that both combine for really entertaining ways. So his first ability is target land becomes a 1/1 creature until end of turn, it's still a land. There's this other card that's in the deck called Mastercore that says pay 2, deal 1 damage to target creature. Combine the 2 of them, and you can pay 3 mana to destroy any 1 target land. So it's a repeatable Stone Rain. This will quickly eliminate any player, especially when you combine the untapping with Seedborn Muse. You're probably going to have 10 to 15 mana per untapped step of each of your opponents, which means you can be blowing up 3 or 4 of their lands every single turn. Generally, no one's really going to be able to recover from this, and you're able to blow up specific colors to keep people off of any answers that they can have for this synergy. So that's a mean one. It will not make you friends, but very effective. His other ability is a repeatable overrun. He's a great way to turn infinite mana that your deck can often easily generate into a win, just by Yisanning out him and then using the infinite mana to pump infinitely to swing for a kill. So those are the 2 cards. Depending on the situation, you might get one or you might get the other. 7 is another very simple one. Platinum Angel. Platinum Angel is the way this deck stops combos. So your opponent's comboing off with Laboratory Maniac, you're getting swung at for 1,000,000 from your Kikijiki shenanigans. Platinum Angel stops all that. So it doesn't really. In order to really understand the synergy, we have to talk about the next step, which is the 8-drop step. So at the 8-drop, there's 2 choices. There's Craterhoof, which is Craterhoof. You play it and you win sometimes. Or there's Archetype of Endurance. So the idea between these 3 creatures is you're able to create a hexproof indestructible Platinum Angel that basically guarantees that while you dirtle for a couple turns and find your win conditions, your opponents can't win the game in any way, shape, or form. There's a couple cards that will get around this, but very few. So that's kind of the standard protect myself from combos while I play the game tutor chain there. And then obviously sometimes you just have the board state necessary for Craterhoof to just win you the game. My deck also has a pretty linear 9, 10, 11, 12 chain. This one is honestly mostly just for the Timmy in you, but it is sometimes relevant. Void Winnower is a new card, but is a very important card. Oftentimes one of the deck's main weaknesses is mass bounce. If you have your Soul and Phyrexia, Platinum Angel, Archetype of Endurance, combo out, there's very little that can actually interact with you. However, an overloaded Cyclonic Rift, say, is something that you just really don't have an answer to. Except for Void Winnower, because your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana costs. So this basically cuts the amount that your opponents have in even their limited ways to interact with you in half. And it is also an 11/9, which is sometimes, relevant. Then you have 10, 11, and 12 drops. This could be Kozilek. It's not really a huge deal. Its 4 ability to put 2 colorless Eldrazi Scion onto play is sometimes relevant, but mostly these are just for the Annihilator, along with It That Betrays, to use your Annihilator triggers in order to steal all of your opponent's permanents. So if you didn't kill them before, then you're able to just swing with a whole bunch of Eldrazi and take all of their stuff, which will generally encourage your opponents to scoop at that point. So that's the creature list.